Natalie, could I begin by asking you to situate Venice in the context of the Mediterranean European economy circa 1491, 1 year before Columbus stumbles upon the New World?
Certainly. So Venice is located at the tip of the Adriatic, which makes it an unlikely Mediterranean power because you have to kind of go around the Adriatic to even get to the main body of the Mediterranean. But that location also gives it a lot of protection and a way of sending webs or establishing networks all across a wide region that spans the Mediterranean in all its parts, going kind of west and south to North Africa and to Egypt, which is a very important connection, but also into across the Alps into Central Europe, or what now we think of as Central Europe, and east and southeast into what today we would call the Balkans and the Ottoman Empire that controls those parts of the world, the descendants of Byzantium. And that connection to both east and west, north and south, it becomes really, really important for the Venetian economy, precisely because the Venetian economy is so reliant on trade connections, on bringing commodities from far away, exchanging them for other either commodities or gold and silver, obviously, particularly after 1492, but with the silver mines of Germany among other things. And those connections establish in Venice a very unique economy that is based not so much on production, but really on trade and long distance trade in particular. And the Venetian elites that are both economic and political, and that kind of blending of the political and the economic is a key to understanding the Venetian economy. That elite becomes very adept at establishing itself in various locales far away from Venice and trading with even longer distance networks. One of the places where Venetian merchant elites establish themselves early on, and that becomes really central to Venetian economic success, is Alexandria, which sits at the Nile Delta in Egypt, and that allows Venetian merchants to access networks that go through the Red Sea and all the way to the Indian Ocean, bringing commodities through that route. Another place where Venetian merchants are very important is Aleppo, in the heartland of Syria, where again Venetian merchants interact with merchants coming through the Silk Route and trading with large networks that bring spices and other commodities through that route as well. So the Venetian economy in many ways is not an insular economy, but from the very beginning a global economy that depends on these wide-reaching, far-reaching networks, and that allows Venetian elites not only to have the wealth that comes with long-distance trade, but also the perspective and the understanding of the world that is, we might call in today's terms, very global and outward-looking, very cosmopolitan, if you will. Venetian merchants not only are aware of what's happening in different parts of the world, but have very immediate social connections in these places, whether through family members who are based in these various port cities and other economic centers, and supervise family firms, family business companies, or through the circulation of news, through letters, through information that's passed on orally, through a variety of exchanges that take place through these networks where people are moving, where objects are moving, where trade and information gets exchanged between these different groups. And that nerve center, that centrality of information to the Venetian economy is economic, to be sure, because to be able to do trade on a global scale, you need information. You need to know where you can buy stuff, where you can sell stuff, what's popular in different places, what are the prices that one can get for one's commodities in different parts of the world. But it's also very much about politics, about understanding different societies, cultivating a certain kind of curiosity and awareness of what we might call today cultural difference, which becomes very, very important for how the Venetian elites understand themselves as very worldly and very aware, as very interested in keeping track of what's happening throughout the world and having investments in the developments in these different parts of the world. So if we think of the Venetian economy in the 15th century, it is really an economy and a politics that is very much based on understanding Venice as part of an almost global network.
If I could follow up with another question. Could you talk a little bit about the Venetian merchants? You mentioned that these are family houses, family businesses, but how are these organized? Who are these people? And how do they finance their operations?
That's a great question, and like all elites in Europe, in a way, these are fabricated elites that kind of invent their own ancestry and their own claim to aristocratic status after the fact. So we don't actually know where all of these families come from, but we know that from very early on, the Venetian elite was unique in that it was very insular and very committed to reproducing itself internally, what scholars of kinship might call endogamy, meaning they don't marry out. They don't marry into other elite families on the Italian peninsula or further afield. They really make sure to keep tabs on their own very small set of aristocratic families called patricians. They even have special books where they write the names of the legitimate born sons and daughters of those families. And to retain that status as a patrician, as a member of the elite, you have to keep marrying into those same families. Those elites are not only economic, or even not primarily economic, but political. They are the only ones that can participate in the political life of the city, getting elected into office, serving in the Venetian government in elite positions. And of course that access to political elite status also grants them access to economic benefits, to the knowledge that I mentioned earlier in terms of being able to know what's happening, where the opportunities lie, and being able to insert themselves into these networks. In terms of how these family firms operate, again, the network effect is crucial for understanding, because a family might send a son or a young person, just like you, university students, in terms of the age group, to apprentice, to learn by doing, by training in a family offshore business in another port city, maybe in Alexandria, maybe in Constantinople, maybe in Cologne, or in another city across the Alps where the Venetian merchant class has a lot of connections. And they might stay there for a few years, learn the local language, interact with local people, get schooled in what it is like to live in a different place, and learn about the family business, create lifelong connections that would then allow them to continue with the business later on. So these connections and this intricacy of connections that is cultivated over generations, of course, becomes even more intense as this finite group of families keep marrying among themselves. So you will have your siblings, but you will also have your cousins, and then you'll have your cousins twice removed, and in a small city where this elite is marrying into itself, you end up really knowing pretty much everyone within that class of merchants and being connected to them in one way or another.
Could we work towards a conclusion by asking you to talk about some of the constraints on Venetian commercial activity, some of the breaks that kept this system from becoming more dynamic, more far-spread?
Certainly. So we can think about this both as a kind of a social, a political, and an economic process, or set of processes that kind of mutually reinforce. At the social level, I mentioned that the Venetian patriciate marries into itself, and in a way, by the 17th century, you really begin to see the very dire consequences of this refusal to broaden your pool of eligible marriage partners, because this creates an unsustainable marriage market, so to speak, where the cost of getting married is prohibitive. There are far too few eligible marriage partners because of the limitations on marrying immediate kin. So that's one immediate constraint on the ability of this class to reproduce itself. On the political level, I think, and in some ways precisely because you have a population that is very mobile. We talked a lot about the patricians, but it's not just the patricians that are mobile in Venice, it's also the working people, the artisans, the laborers, the specialists in marine technologies, the mariners, the shipbuilders, etc. And that population that is mobile is very adept at moving to other places where other places are more happening or more thriving economically, and they certainly are able to take their knowledge and expertise with them. And at the economic level, if you think about a society that is reliant exclusively on commerce and doesn't have any focus on production and cultivating industries locally, that also becomes a major problem, particularly by the 18th century, where so much of the motor of economic activity is not just long-distance trade, but also manufacturing and developing new commodities that are desirable locally and for more local and regional markets. Venice is not terribly adept at that, and by the 18th century it is definitely weakened by the scale of economic operations of much larger empires, particularly in the north, if we think about France and Britain, but prior to that even Spain and Portugal. So all of these elements together, I think, really work against the Venetian economy of, say, the 15th or 16th century being able to sustain itself in the longer